Hello, fam. Today I want to talk about the uncomfortable truth about the Democratic Party, President Biden, and Vice President Harris. Many of us, particularly in the Black community, are grappling with a reality that cannot be ignored. So let's talk about the current political climate because I'm tired of listening to all of these pundits and people who wish to insert their viewpoint on something, expecting us to just bow down and accept whatever. We've seen Trump's approval rating surprisingly rise in the early days of his presidency. In fact, he seems to be getting things done, or at least a significant segment of his base thinks so.
Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver and former Florida Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo. So, Carlos, the latest CBS News poll shows the president with a 53% approval rating after his first 3 weeks in office. What do you make of that?
Jose, it means that the president is doing a lot of the things that the American people elected him to do. The coalition he put together wanted him to be this radical change agent. Now, but so far so good in terms of the president's numbers. He has rarely had numbers this high.
Well, he's never had that number in during his first administration. But Juanita, that CBS News poll also shows that 69% think President Trump is tough, 63% he's energetic, 60% focused, 58% effective. How do you explain this, Juanita?
I saw on CNN the other day, there were some awfully long faces, and they seemed quite perplexed. But let's be clear, I'm not advocating for Donald Trump or his policies. In fact, I have profound disagreements with him, particularly his racist and anti-education stances. But here's where the Democrats fall short. For years, the Democratic Party has taken the Black vote for granted, believing that mere support for critical issues like immigration reform and providing services to migrants is enough to retain our loyalty. Meanwhile, what has been done for us? Ultimately, nothing. With all that talk of refuge assistance, food, education, housing, where's the meaningful help for Black Americans who are struggling with poverty, unemployment, gun violence, and systematic racism? Now, I don't have the same type of negative viewpoint on immigration that some of my friends might have. But at the same time, I recognize for decades, Black Americans have been begging for resources and been largely ignored by the very political base that we empower.
These South and West Side homeowners are angry. They believe the city has overextended itself and should be putting the tens of millions of dollars earmarked for migrants into Chicago's most vulnerable neighborhoods.
But the South Side has been under-resourced, underfunded for years, for decades. We have schools that need to be reopened. We have buildings that are abandoned that need to be business operated.
The group says the city has abandoned its Invest Southwest initiative, a Lightfoot-era program that was dedicated to reversing decades of disinvestment on Chicago's South and West Sides, promising to align more than $2.2 billion through public and private funding.
We are taxpayers, we're property owners. Our money should go towards fixing our communities.
The city has received more than 15,000 migrants since August 2022.
We have no more room. Y'all are embarrassing Chicago as a whole.
According to analysis by the ABC7 data team, there are more than 20 active migrant shelters across the city, 7 located on the South and West Sides.
Whether it's one shelter or whether it's 10 shelters, we're saying the facilities that are there for us, the money needs to be put into those facilities for us.
In a statement from the mayor's office about the group's concerns and the status of Invest Southwest, a spokesperson says in part, quote, "We are committed to continued investment for all residents, but especially communities on the South and West Sides that have long experienced disinvestment. We are the city of Chicago, and our shoulders are big enough to support both new arrivals and those who have long called this city home."
Mayor Johnson, the Black aldermen, the Black alderwomen in this city, you will stand for the Black citizens of Chicago.
If the presidency of Trump 2.0 doesn't teach us anything, it should teach us all that the presidency of the United States wields a great deal of power. Now, I've always known this, and this is one of the reasons why I was so critical of Barack Obama and even Biden, but most notably Barack Obama, because I felt like he had a reason. He needed to be the one, and he was not. And what I normally heard from Democrats who love Barack Obama, who almost deify him, is, well, he didn't have power. He didn't have control of the House. He didn't have control of the Senate. Now, when he first got in fact, they worked hard to pass Obamacare in the middle of the night. I got no problem with that. But the thing is, why couldn't he do what Trump has done? On day one, just start throwing out executive orders and throwing them at these courts and seeing what will stick, particularly when you have power. And that's the thing. Trump is challenging the establishment. Whether you like him or not, he's showing us what a president can do. I mean, I'm just under the assumption that many of these things won't go through. But look at what he's done. He's locked out Congress out of the Board of Education building. That shows you how much power he has.
We're coming in. We're coming in. Don't lock the door. We're coming in. Who are you?
You're not coming in.
Who are you?
Who are you?
Who are you? Who are you,
sir?
Do you have business here?
Yes.
I
have sent the secretary. I've sent the assistant secretary a letter alerting her that we would be here today, and we've asked her for a meeting.
Yeah, I don't know that that's been accepted, so until that's
Wait,
doesn't need to be accepted.
Who are you?
Can you see this?
And what do you do here?
What do you do
I
here?
have security responsibility.
Get out of the way. We pay you. We pay for your job. We pay you.
We're members of
We pay you.
We're members of
You
Congress.
here.
Nobody has accepted a meeting.
You
Wait a
are.
minute. We haven't heard that from the secretary. We
Your
haven't heard that from
children.
the spokesman.
I'm relaying that.
You are not the spokesman for the department. You are a security guard.
Can you identify?
I already did.
We are members of Congress.
Where's your badge? Where's your badge?
You
Where's
don't
your
have any
ID?
identification.
Where's your ID? Where's your ID?
We are not.
It's not good enough.
We are not.
They want to close the Department of Education. They want to cut back on funding for low-income areas through Title I. They want to eliminate Head Start. They want to cut back on school lunches, cut back on access to college. And we're going to make sure that they recognize that that has to go through Congress and through our committee. And if we can get 3 Republicans to join us on the committee, we can stop everything they want to do. And if it gets out of committee, we need 3 Republicans in the United States to join us to block what they want to do in abolishing the Department of Education.
President Donald Trump has promised to abolish the Department of Education, and he believes that he can do this through executive order. And we're here to remind him that he cannot. Trump and Musk have placed DOJ staffers in the building where they have access to the private data of millions of students and families. Already, they have placed dozens of employees who perform vital services on which our schools, teachers, and students depend on leave. So we're here today to follow up on a letter that 95 of my colleagues and I sent this week. We asked to meet with the acting secretary, and we have yet to receive a response. We are here to ask her, will you comply with an illegal executive order to shut down the Department of Education? We will not cede the responsibility for our future generations to one man, his ideology, and his unelected lieutenants.
And he is not exempt. Barack Obama had this power, and so did Joe Biden, and neither one of them had the gumption to at least step up and do what their base was demanding. And that's what Trump is doing. He's doing exactly what his base is demanding, whether it goes through or not, and he'll at least get credit for that. We cannot do that. We cannot say that for Barack Obama or Joe Biden. Let's see. Okay, some of my brothers here might be able to relate to this. Imagine the side chick or the recreational use only girl. You don't claim her. You're not trying to wife her up. You don't even take her out to McDonald's to eat. You only call her up when you want to sneak over and use her for the night. After that, you'll just choose to ignore all of her phone calls until you need her services again. Well, that's exactly what the Democratic Party does to us. They treat us like sideline hoes and don't call us back until the next election cycle. Meanwhile, trying to wife up other groups who don't remotely display the same level of loyalty. And we're the only group too naive to believe that this is a marriage of love and respect. For example, I remember back in 2020 after Trump lost, folks like Sean Hannity and those guys called Fox and Friends were asking things like, what can we do to resonate with the base and galvanize the party? There were even talks suggesting that Donald Trump might not be the man to move them forward in the future. They sought out to find out what their base wanted, not shame or ridicule them. You know what that's called? Respect with some stank on it. The problem is we don't get that because the Democratic Party doesn't respect us, largely because they know that they don't have to court us and they'll get our vote at 90% most of the time on average. It's essential for us to have honest discussions about the choices at the ballot box without facing mockery and neglect from those who claim to have our backs.
I will say, a lot of black men sometimes feel like they're ignored or they're put down, particularly sometimes even by black women in the media. So this is not that. But I do hear Roland's point that felt ignored. But you feel ignored and then you go over to the other side. The oppressed feel oppressed. So then you go and try to align with the oppressor. So I'm not putting black men down, but sometimes it's like, well, some of you Kevin Samuels following Tariq Nasheed quoting people, please look at the truth and see what's happening and get in line with some of the black women.
I love these people, especially my haters, who out see Larry, they were, Roland Martin trying to tell y'all to vote and why you gotta vote and all this. Guess what? The conservatives were waiting for us to be stupid. The conservatives were waiting for us to sit on the couch. For all y'all smart asses out there, let me help y'all out.
It's not about abandoning the Democratic Party. It's about holding them accountable and insisting on policies that truly benefit us, instead of just merely voting out of fear or guilt. Now, let's be real about this. Sitting or voting for a third party is not a betrayal. It's a reflection of a frustration from a political establishment that is still not addressing our issues directly. We aren't at the behest or owe any political party our allegiance, and I mean any. Isn't that the exact same thing that diehard Democrats say about the MAGA Trump supporters? About them being mindlessly worshiping at the altar of their political party and Donald Trump? So, instead of just using F around and find out as some sort of weapon against our community, let's shift the conversation to how Democrats can improve and earn our votes. Besides, shaming voters is a piss-poor way to get people motivated or willing to support you or your cause. So what can we learn from the recent developments surrounding Trump? Should that compel us to just simply bow down and vote for Democrats even though they disregard the progressive policies that could uplift our communities? I'm not convinced that the lesson we should be learning is to take that from this particular event. It seems instead we are just being told to sacrifice our demands in favor of a return to the status quo, and that's simply unacceptable. One of the things that's compelling to a lot of people about Donald Trump is he just believes in just coming in and not only shaking up things, but destroying things. Donald Trump is basically a disruptor in the minds of many Americans, whether they agree with them or not. Joe Biden was simply a product of going back to normalcy. We shouldn't be shamed for wanting our voices heard or for demanding that our elected officials take us seriously. The reality is that if we keep accepting half measures and empty promises, we will continue to see our needs slip further down the list of priorities. In an act of disrespect, ego, and arrogance, Barack Obama tried to come at black men with a completely dishonest narrative.
I'm going to go ahead and just speak some truths, if you don't mind. Because my understanding, based on reports I'm getting from campaigns and communities, is that we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly and say that when you have a choice that is this clear, when on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles and pain and joy that comes from those experiences, who's had to work harder and do more and overcome and achieves the second highest office in the land and is putting forward concrete proposals to directly address the things that are vital in our neighborhoods and our communities, from housing to making sure that our mothers and our fathers and our grandparents can afford medicine, and making sure that we are dealing with prices that are too high and rents that are too high, and are committed to making sure that we maintain the Affordable Care Act, so everybody's got health care, and cares about things like education and entrepreneurship in our neighborhoods. And that's on one side. And on the other side, you have someone who has consistently shown disregard, not just for the communities, but for you as a person. And you're thinking about sitting out? But, you know, Cousin Pookie might be. And you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that. Because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other...
I mean, after all, this is the same so-called black man who didn't do anything specifically for black people, but he had no problem with doing for other groups, countries, and movements. Misogyny? Look at the black men's track record for voting over the last 30 or 35 years. We even voted for Hillary Clinton. It wasn't about misogyny, Barry. It was that we didn't like Kamala Harris.
Do you support reparations for black people?
Well, listen, again, we had over 200 years of slavery. We had Jim Crow for almost a century. We had legalized discrimination, segregation, and now we have segregation and discrimination that is not legal but still exists and is a barrier to progress. We have disparities around housing. We have disparities around education. We have disparities around income. And we have to recognize that everybody did not start out on an equal footing in this country. And in particular, black people have not. And so we have got to recognize that and do something about that and give folks a lift up. That's why, for example, I'm proposing the LIFT Act. Give people who are making $100,000 or less as a family a tax credit, which will benefit and uplift 60% of black families who are in poverty.
So by default, it affects black families, but there's not a particular policy for African Americans that you would explore.
But no, if you look at the reality of who will benefit from certain policies, when you take into account that they're not starting at the same place and they're not starting on equal footing, it will directly benefit black children, black families, black homeowners, because the disparities are so significant. So if we focus on the specific issues that have resulted in the greatest disparities, and we understand that that's part of why we're doing it. Listen, the reality also is this: any policy that will benefit black people will benefit all of society. Let's be clear about that. Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people.
Black American men are also socialized to be okay with women in leadership. In fact, that's all most of us has ever seen most of our lives to some degree. European patriarchy is made for the black man as about as much as the feminist movement is made for the black woman. My point? Neither construct was designed for us, and historically, we have worked as a team. And let's talk about Kamala Harris's outreach. Instead of focusing on the working poor or engaging more with progressive members of the Democratic Party who want meaningful change and bold policies, she seemed to have just reached out farther to the right. We've seen her woo moderate Republicans like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney more than she ever engaged with her own party's left-wing base. I think this strategy did nothing to address the pressing issues that many in our communities is facing. By leaning towards conservatives, Harris decided to alienate the very voters who had stood by the Democrats through thick and thin. Basically, they owe us more than we owe them. And then there's this issue on reparations. California Democrats, what happened to that reparations bill? It fell through the cracks, and I know why. It's because you wanted to do everything in your power to protect Gavin Newsom.
On Sunday, lawmakers passed landmark bills to make amends for racism. The proposal they approved allows for the return of land or compensation to families whose property was unfairly taken by the government, and an informal apology for laws and practices that harmed black people. But the buzz surrounding the reparation bills package was over what wasn't addressed: direct payments.
We laid the foundation that those bills are critically important to, stand up what reparations would be here in the state of California.
State Senator Stephen Bradford authored SB 1403, aims to establish the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, while SB 1331 funds reparations. Both were not voted on.
We should have gotten it to the governor's desk. He never signaled he would veto the bill. He just said he had some concerns, as they have with many bills. But that doesn't mean you don't move forward with the bills, because, you can fix them.
The California Legislative Black Caucus pulled the bill because it said the proposal needs more work.
The bills that pass are not reparations. An apology is not reparations.
Chris Lodgeson, a reparation activist with Coalition for Just and Equitable California.
The only bills today that even had a chance of being called reparations or could even get us to reparations are the bills that did not pass. It's one thing if we go up for a vote and we lose. Oh, all right. It's one thing if we go up for a vote, we win, and it gets to the governor's desk and the governor vetoes it.
Supporters of the reparations say they're not giving up despite the setback.
It has to happen if we were going to have meaningful reparations to the people who deserve it. We're 160 years overdue for this.
And the silence has been deafening. Where's the acknowledgement of centuries of systemic racism and the debts owed? Instead, we're hearing more about supporting migrants than about addressing our economic disparities. It's time for a wake-up call. The Democrats need to realize they can't continue this pattern of outright neglect. They can't just assume loyalty as some sort of birthright. Joe Biden, Barry, Kamala Harris, and the other Democrats that are out there, they need to offer us something concrete. It can't just be about being afraid of what Trump might do or what he represents. We need actionable change. that addresses our rights, our economic concerns, and our community needs. At the end of the day, if this is the state of politics, Black Americans must rethink our alliances. Holding the Democrats accountable doesn't mean endorsing their opposition. It means demanding better for our communities, our children, and our grandchildren's futures.
We started by talking about what areas, if any, are better for Black America now than they were before Barack Obama took office.
I'm sad to report that in every single leading economic category, Black America has lost ground over the last decade. In every major economic category, we've lost ground. So this book comes out, as you said, in 2006. So clearly, this book was out before Obama shows up to win in 2008. So the book was never about Barack Obama then. This 10-year update is not about him now. But it is true that over these last 10 years, most of that on his watch, Black America has lost ground in the major economic indicator categories.
What accounts for the fact that that so little progress, or indeed the backsliding, what accounts for that going on under the leadership of the first African-American president? How do we explain that?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. And to your question, how do we explain it? I don't know. I think the historians are going to have a very difficult time trying to juxtapose how, in the era of the first Black president, the bottom fell out for Black America. That's going to be a hard juxtaposition to make. I hope to be around to read what their account is for why they think that happened. But my research in this text suggests a few things in no particular order. Number one, there was too much deference to the president by Black people. We got so caught up in the symbolism that we didn't press hard enough on the substance. And so symbolism does matter. I just think substance matters as well. And so there was too much deference in some part to the president on the part of Black people. Black leaders were sidelined and silenced too often in favor of an invitation to the White House. And so more could have been done in terms of pressing an agenda. You look at the gay and lesbian community, look at the environmental movement. Of course, Wall Street gets everything they want, but look at what other communities gained over the last decade, and look how Black America wasn't just stagnant, but indeed lost ground over the last 10 years, in part one, because we were too deferential. Number two, clearly there was indifference. There's no doubt about the fact that the president received the kind of headwind that no president has ever received. There was clearly obstructionism, so that's a factor as well. But the third factor, I think, I would put as a question. I think, again, historians would debate this for years to come. Did Barack Obama not get enough done on Black issues because he was obstructed, or did he not try hard enough? Did he not do enough? And I think the answer is clearly both. We'll see whether historians come down on that. But this book, again, is not about him per se. It's about where Black America is 10 years after that text. And again, it's just not a happy report. There are pockets of progress, but across the board, we've regressed.
Tavis, I want to ask you about the president. I know you said the book's not about him, but think of him not as the president, but as someone who cares passionately about the same issues you're talking about. Do you think when he reads your book, I'm assuming he will, that he'll agree with your conclusions, or do you think he'll take issue with them and see his legacy in a different way? Well,
that's a good question, Mark. I think, number one, it's hard to argue with the data. This is not a book that I wrote and espouse my particular point of view. There'll be plenty of books written about whether Barack Obama measured up or didn't measure up where Black issues were concerned. I just saw a book come across my desk the other day. I think it's The Black Presidency by Michael Eric Dyson is out in Black History Month in February. That's the first of many. I might even write one myself, who knows, about what he did or didn't do vis-a-vis Black issues. But this book, again, is about the issues. And so I think when he reads it, to answer your question, Mark, if he wants to argue with the data, then so be it. But this book is data-based. Indiana University, the School of Public and Environmental Affairs, the academics there, the professors there who are trained in these disciplines wrote the book. They wrote the research, did the research rather, and wrote these 10 updated chapter segments on where we are 10 years later. So you can argue with me, but I'm not the guy who pulled the data. You can argue with the data, and I think you're not going to be very successful at that.